I call this presentation a memoriam to Doug Leng, mentor and friend. Many of you know Doug Leng for his long career as a chemical engineer, a PhD chemical engineer, and mixing study expert, and the many contributions he made to the field. Doug worked for the Dow Chemical Company for over 40 years, but I've known Doug for over 50 years. First working for and then with him on a non-Newtonian fermentation mixing study in the 70s that was intended to increase the production of a tuberculosis treatment medication, rifampicin, produced by a mycelial Streptomyces bacteria. I will talk a little bit about that study, but I would also like to cover the AIChE event we traveled to together and attended together in Chicago, as well as his love of sailing the North Channel of Lake Huron. Over the years, Doug and I also chaired the local AIChE sections, and we also preferred using Apple Macintosh computers over Windows PCs and chaired those in-town clubs as well. Doug also was very instrumental in curling in Midland, and I'll talk a little bit about that. The intention of this presentation is not to focus just on Doug's professional career, but on his interests outside of the Dow Chemical Company. So let's get started. Again, I'm just going to go through this. I'll talk a little bit about Dow and Midland, improving rifampicin production by increasing aeration during fermentation and Streptomyces bacterium, getting Doug's help in preparing a fermenter for a fermentation, traveling with Doug to Chicago to an AIChE meeting where there were some presentations on fermentation, there were some presentations on instrumentation and how you could automate that instrumentation. Doug's love of sailing the North Channel of Lake Huron, his love of curling, and sharing the local Macintosh user group or MyAmug groups in Midland. So Dow in Midland, Michigan. Dow Chemical Midland plant covers 2,000 and their administration facilities cover some 2,052 acres. That's about 3.2 square miles of real estate. Dow and its subsidiaries employ over 7,000 employees and contractors just in Midland, and as of 2020, about 35,700 people in total around the globe. Dow split off into three separate companies in 2019, Dow, DuPont, and Corteva. Prior to splitting into those three companies, Dow DuPont had 98,000 employees in total. DuPont's post-spinoff numbers of employees is nearly the same as Dow's at 35,000, and that split occurred in 2019. Doug got his PhD in chemical engineering from Purdue University in 1955. He married Marguerite Lambert, a PhD in biochemistry, that same year, and both came to Midland and joined Dow that same year. As you know, Doug's expertise was in fluid mechanics and mixing capabilities. Dow Le Petit mixing study. I joined Dow in 1992 after getting my BS in chemical engineering from Purdue. I joined Dow Interdisciplinary Group, or DIG Engineering, in that year. Doug was the director of the lab, and I was assigned to a fermentation mixing study intended to increase the production of a tuberculosis treatment called rifampicin. I was asked to host a potential candidate for the lab, and I was taking him around for interviews. Doug agreed to calibrate some probes for the next fermentation run because we have a very short window to inoculate fermenters when the material that, or when the culture that you've grown up from a petri dish to a flask to inoculate a fermenter is the optimum times to make each of those transfers is very important. So Doug agreed to calibrate the probes for the next fermentation run, and I pointed out to him that for the dissolved oxygen probe you can't take more than about 1 minute to do the calibration, so it didn't matter, just hit within 98 to 102%, you'd be all right. And I thought he had heard me. But anyway, we walked into the lab after I had taken the candidate to his last interview, and the candidate looked at me kind of surprised, as what we saw was Doug focused on trying to calibrate the dissolved oxygen probe, and the lab tech, who apparently was quite intimidated by Doug, was running back and forth between the overflow trap to the sink, and wasn't telling Doug that a fair amount of the fermentation mash was flowing over into that overflow trap. Long story short, we had to scrub the fermentation, and oh, by the way, we hired the candidate. In 1976, we traveled to the annual meeting of AIChE, which was on November 30th in Chicago. We talked about the mixing study and talked about the presentations we were going to go to, because there was discussions on automation and various agitator designs for fermenters, and so this was interest because we were into this study. The analog computer that we were using to basically glean data from the various probes we had, we were monitoring temperature, dissolved oxygen, pressure in the fermenter. We did some media modifications to see if some minerals would improve the production of rifampicin at the same time. But because the mycelial, the streptomyces is very mycelial, it caused a very non-Newtonian fluid flow within a fermenter. And so getting dissolved oxygen to the cells was very important, and so we were trying different agitator designs and baffle designs. We had dinner with my parents at my parents' house, because I grew up on the south side of Chicago, so we had to go through this area anyway to get to the downtown meeting. I discovered Doug was originally from Canada and really liked to sail and curl. And he liked to sail in the upper channel of Lake Huron. At that meeting, I got an invitation to sail with Doug on his boat in a race that went from Saginaw Bay to Tawas Point. It's a night race, so that was really cool as well, because it was a clear night when we did the sail. This was in the summer of 1977. So these are just some shots of Doug and Marguerite and their boat and the various types of inlets they would stay in overnight and then sail during the day. One of the things that the upper channel has is a number of very interesting inlets where you can moor your boat for the evening. Sunsets are spectacular, and at night many times you get a view of the northern lights. Just another shot of Doug's boat anchored. He and Marguerite, always a smile on their face when they're on the boat. Various sailing opportunities. Doug ensured me that it was almost impossible to capsize his boat. But the way he used a spinnaker and a sail, if you had a decent wind, I wondered if you could actually capsize that boat. Just a little bit better shot of his boat, and the fact that he kept it very clean. He was smiling even when it was raining on the boat. And just some additional shots of that boat. Midland curling. Doug was born in Canada and always loved curling. He started the curling club on an outdoor rink at Emerson Park in the 50s after joining Dow. If you're familiar with Midland in the wintertime, the temperatures can range from 20 to 30 when you'd be curling, all the way down to minus 20 to minus 30. And if you've ever curled, that means the stones are going to react much differently. So in 1965, Doug was instrumental in having a building built that would house a set of curling rinks and would basically buffer the conditions that they had endured in their outdoor rinks. From 1965 to 2008, that building was the home of the Midland Curling Club, and Doug introduced me to curling in 1973, where I continued to curl for several years, but then got redirected when my wife and I had children, and we bought a place up north on a lake. However, one of my sons has continued to curl, and from 2010 to the present, he doesn't curl every year, but I'd say in 6 out of those 10 years or so, he has enjoyed curling at the new Midland Curling Club. So what I'd like to talk about here is that in 2008, a new curling rink was built across from the community center in Midland. Doug and Marguerite were instrumental in dedicating and opening both buildings, the 1965 building and the 2008 building. And what follows is just some photos of the new curling facility in Midland and an excerpt from the interview of Doug and his thoughts about thinking back over the years he had enjoyed curling in Midland. So the 16,000 square foot facility has 4 sheets of ice, a warming area, kitchen, and some restrooms. And it's a very uniform environment, even more uniform than what we had in the older building in the 60s through the 2000s. This is just an excerpt from the interview with Doug. He was one of 11 founding members that basically founded the Midland Curling Club in 1962 and was one of more than 100 people that were there in 2008 when they dedicated the new $1.5 million, 16,000 square foot Midland Curling Center, which is adjacent to the community center. From 1965 to 2007, they curled in the older building, and he was thrilled with the fact that they were instrumental in getting this new curling center built in Midland in 2000, basically between 2006 and 2008. So these over the years, since 1984, Doug and I have served as club presidents for the local Macintosh users group. What follows are some photos of Doug at the meetings and giving presentations. So just to give you a feel for the size of the building, we usually have anywhere from 30 to 50 members that attend a monthly meeting on a Saturday, second Saturday of each month, at a local church in town. Doug, when he was giving a presentation, always had his MacBook Pro and an iPad and usually his iPhone someplace. And in normal Doug presentation mode, he was always using his hands to demonstrate or point out a particular important point that he was trying to make. Here he's giving a presentation on iOS 7 on an iPhone 5S, and so the overhead projections were very helpful to the folks that would watch these meetings. So all I can say is thank you, Doug. It was an honor to work for you. It was an honor to work with you. AIChE meetings we attended helped me understand you better. The night sailing race to Taos on your boat was awesome. I am glad you stayed with the Mac and other Apple products even after Dow decided to go all Microsoft PCs. Thank you for your leadership in Dow, in Midland, in AIChE, and in the Curling Club, and also in the Mac Club. Doug, I miss you.